Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Coolbaugh. Today, I have me a very special returning guest, H.M. Long. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Oh, excellent, excellent. I was so happy that I could get you back on because I've read Hall of Smoke now, and I feel like I was talking to somebody. They're like, "Well, don't you want to read books of authors before you interview them?" And I'm like, honestly, and I recommend this to people, if you could talk to an author beforehand or listen to a podcast they were on, I almost feel like I got the director's cut or like the
That
commentary.
makes yeah.
Like, there were things that you talked about in our first interview, which I highly recommend people to go back and check out our first interview, in season 1. I think it was like 47 or 48. But yeah, it was so cool because there were things that we talked about in that interview that I'm like, "Oh, okay, I could totally see, like what you were saying." And there were things that, you talked about where there was like a mystery to me, and then I was able to, as I'm reading, go through and be like, "Oh, this is what, she meant by this." And I don't know. I just personally, as a writer and a reader, I feel like I'm addicted to it now. Like, I've gotten way more out of it, of reading people's books, like, Hall of Smoke, like yours, than just reading and then talking to somebody. I feel like I have gypped myself in the past somewhat, like, with some great conversations and some great learning experiences, as a writer myself. But yeah, it was definitely one of my favorite reads within the last 5 years. It was really
I'm
like
so glad.
was really awesome. Yeah, it was really good. And one of my friends, who had first suggested, your books to me, and Hall of Smoke, I, was able to talk to you later, and I was like, that was one of the best suggestions that somebody has given, and it's one of my favorite covers.
The cover is super awesome. It is nothing what I expected it was going to be.
Oh.
When I got the email from my publisher, like Hollow Smoke cover. This was not what I expected it to be, but I ended up really loving it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
very
definitely. I
shiny.
showed it to my mom because my mom got me into design, and she was just like, "Oh my gosh, this is awesome." So I showed her actually, all three within this universe, and she was like,
Yeah,
"That's just so cool." So yeah, Borrowed Winter I just grabbed, a couple weeks ago, so I'm really
hmm
excited to. Well, I have to go back too though and read book 2 first, but yeah, I was really excited to see that cover too. I was like, "Oh, cool, you're going with that same type of thing." But different,
yeah,
different color scheme. So it was really cool. But yeah, Hall
yeah,
of Smoke, definitely recommend it for our audience. If you have not read it yet, then you're just wasting a really, really great book. So you might as well go get it today and read it. And then you can post in the comments how right that, my friend was. So Dan, if you're out there listening, great job, buddy.
thanks, Dan.
Yeah. So we'll go to the first one. I know it's been a while. I know we talked on, here and there on social media and stuff like that. But for our audience, what have you been up to since your third book release, Borrow of Winter?
So since Bear of Winter released, I have written the fourth book in the Hollow Smoke series, Pillar of Ash. The Hollow Smoke series actually has an official name now. It's called The Four Pillars. It,
Oh,
it apparently has a
cool.
real name. It showed up on Amazon one day, and I was like, oh. Yeah. So the fourth and final book, the one after this one, is coming out
Oh,
January
that's exciting.
15th.
Oh, that's awesome.
Pillar of Ash. The cover is nice and green and gold, and I love it. It looks so good with the rest of the covers. So yeah, so I was writing that, I was editing that. Yeah, I've been writing and editing Dark Water Daughter 2.
Cool.
That's my new series, which is starting in July. We're starting to publish these books in between the Hall of Smoke books.
Oh,
So I have
cool.
a book coming out every 6 months now. Dark Water Daughter is out July 11th, and then Dark Water Daughter 2 is out July 2024. So I have been trying to edit the second book, trying to make it something readable that I can send to my publisher. So that's been most of what I've been doing. Yeah, it's been busy. I really wanted to start publishing books more quickly, and my publisher is wonderful. They're like, yeah, let's do that. But it has been very interesting trying to like bounce between projects, and they're two
Yeah.
very different worlds. Like they're both fantasy, but they're quite different. So making that switch hasn't always been easy in my mind. Um, yeah, but it's also a very much a learning and growing experience as an author. So it's good stuff.
That's awesome. Well, I'm so glad to see, this new world take shape because I know in our first interview, you had talked about, that you had, this project that you wanted to do, and you wanted to do this similar type of publishing schedule. So I'm so glad to
Mhm.
see.
Oh, I did mention that. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You did
I should
mention
have re-listened to our first interview before I did that.
we were like, I can't mention the name and things because it's not official. I'm like, that's fine. And then but it's so cool when somebody does that, and then I see it, take shape on social media, and then the book comes out. I still have to get my copy. But it's so cool when that happens, for me, because it's like I'm a teacher, so I love, seeing that happen for students. So seeing that with authors too and creators
Mhm.
is just so cool. So I was so excited, to see that happen for you. My buddy and I call this the Briggs method, because
Mhm.
Patricia Briggs does this with her two different series in the same world. And,
Okay.
one year, yeah, like I think they're about 9 to 10 months apart at this point. But it's nice because we always have something,
Yeah.
right on the
That
cusp. And so
that
it's really,
sounds like a good distance apart. I think six
yeah.
months might be a little short. If I could bump it up to 8 or 9, I think that would be ideal, but we'll see.
For people like him and me, where it's like, then we want the paperback as well, because him and I will buy the paper. We'll get the
Oh,
hard
yeah.
and split it or something like from the library, and then we'll do the Kindle. But we also always like a paperback of her books, so we'll flip them back and forth.
Mhm.
So it's kind of hard though because it got bumped back because of her other like publishing thing.
Yeah.
Because the hardcover's coming out for the other one, I'm like, oh no, like we don't have a paperback right now. So it used to be really nice until the recent, like pandemic and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's been some
Harder. So
chaos.
yeah, yeah, but it was a perfect, before it was perfect. Now it's like kind of hard because it's like, oh yeah, it's like 11 to 13 months after then, both of
Mm,
us, then the paperback will be out. But we always love to do it for that book club reread. So but initially it was a really good one. So yeah, him and I always talk about that. He's like, you should do something like that. So we're always discussing that kind of release date. So it's nice, because there's enough time in between, I feel like where she, can advertise and stuff like that. And then I'm totally blanking on what the company is that does her books. I only got like 50 of them on my shelf. I think it's like Ace or something like that.
okay.
But it's interesting, because just seeing how different companies, like Tor and Orbit, release different authors. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's so long in between. And then other times you're like, oh, this book just came out. So I feel like it's hard to find that sweet spot. So yeah, it'll be a
Yeah.
good one for her, I think. But yeah, it'd be interesting to look at that in the future. I think I might do that as an episode now. But
I'm interested to look back at it in the future, like 5 years from now, if I continue doing this, if it worked, if
yeah,
it
yeah,
didn't, like,
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know. It
Well, that's one
keeps me
reason why
busy.
I do this.
So.
Yeah. No, totally. My buddy was just talking about that. He's like, it's one reason why you do these, right? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, it'd be interesting, 5 years from now to see, what people were doing, or, and I had a couple authors say
Mhm.
that. They're like, yeah, I say this now. They're like, quote me. I'm like, okay. So I was like, in 5 years, I'm gonna quote you. So a couple friends of
That's a
mine were
little frightening.
like, yeah, I know, right? So we're like, we'll see how these things work out.
I'm gonna watch what I say, man.
Well, I think that's a perfect tie-in, though, to talking about the second question. So, what is your Dark Water Daughter book about, and how did you come up with this idea?
So Darkwater Daughter is about a weather witch and a disgraced naval officer racing to bring down a deathless pirate lord in in an original fantasy world of warring fleets and winter seas. Because I was looking at, like there isn't a whole lot of pirate fantasy.
Yeah,
And if there is, it's always like warm climates.
yeah,
Or
yeah, yeah.
like usually that's kind of like the default.
Oh,
And I was
totally.
like, no, I want it to be winter.
Ooh,
So, and then that aspect actually really built into the world building because winter seas are much more treacherous. What do
yeah,
you have to adjust and change in order to be able to actually have like this kind of like nautical maritime culture without everybody just dying all the time and drowning? So, weather witches, and some other aspects. Yeah. So it's a swashbuckling epic fantasy adventure. There is a little bit of romance, but I would not call it romantic fantasy or anything, and I wouldn't want readers to come in looking for that because they might be disappointed. Yes, there's just a dash of slow burn romance, and it's mainly just adventure and lots of like really deep lore. It's very atmospheric, and of course cinematic action, which is like one of my favorite elements.
that's
Right.
fair.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great sell right there. I love the blurb too. I was actually looking at it a couple weeks ago again, because a buddy of mine was like, "I need something," and he was like, "I was like, this is like right up your alley." So I sent it to her. She's like, "Yeah, this definitely seems like my thing." I just didn't realize that. No wonder she liked it because she loves the, more than like northern, winter stuff.
Mhm.
It's her favorite season. So kind of funny that I
Nice.
didn't even realize that. I guess I missed that when I was reading the book or whatever. But that's cool. That makes me think. That's just cool world building. But it takes me back too to some of the things that you did in Hall of Smoke too, where I got done with the book, and we were on vacation, and we are at like a lake, like a resort and stuff. And my wife's like, "What are you gonna do now?" I was like, "Oh, I think I'm gonna." She goes, "I know you're just gonna go read that book some." So I went back, and she was pregnant at the time, so she was like was sleep a little bit more and stuff. So I was sitting there, I was like, I'm just gonna keep reading this book. So I got really into like the lore of your world,
Hmm.
mythology. I loved how you did like the gods and goddesses. I thought the magic system was really cool. I loved like the. I also really loved the like Oh, just like the reputation, I guess you could say, of like the main
Hmm.
character and her order.
Uh-huh.
Really cool. Like, but I thought like your world building was really great. And I'm trying to think of like a better way to describe it. It's like for the audience, because we always I feel like I feel like Hall of Smoke for me was almost like a study. There are certain books I study characters, and not that I didn't love your characters, I did, but like the world building for me felt so real and so layered with just different things you did that I really went back and read different parts just to learn essentially, and I'm
That's
like, this is
I'm
really
honored.
cool.
Thank you.
I was like, it's so cool,
I'm
with what
so
you
glad.
did. And I'm like, I want to be able to do that, and it was like, so if, I just want to say for our audience, like, if they want something, an author where, the world building is going to be deep. And, it felt like you had we always talk about the iceberg. I felt like there was an iceberg where like, I was swimming in your world building ocean, and I felt like it was like very, very deep below me. If anybody's ever swimming in the ocean in a deep spot or a lake, you can like feel it. And when I was going through, you could like really feel it. And I love the different groups of people that you had. So when you're saying Weather Witch, I'm like, okay, sold. I'm like, definitely, definitely. Because when you're talking about world building, I mean, I think every author says that. But for me, reading Hall of Smoke, I'm like, okay, like I feel like I have, it's almost like wine, your different particular vintage that you like, and
Hmm.
type of world building I really enjoyed. So even though it's a new series and universe, whatever, I don't care. I'm like sold. So that definitely to me, when I was
Glad to
reading
hear it.
it, I was like, oh, this just sounds really cool. So I was like definitely adding that to the the TBR pile for the summer. But yeah, it was super super cool. So I was really excited to see, like I said from the first interview that you were that this worked out for you, because I was so excited to see how you were going to world build a little differently for this this year.
Hmm.
So for me that's going to be really exciting to read, so I'm really excited about that.
I think that readers who've read Hall of Smoke will see some similarities because it's my work and I do love
Yeah.
like wintry worlds and stuff like that. But Darkwater Daughter is pretty different.
Oh,
Um, and I kind of I based it more in a historical period
oh,
before
cool.
I went off and started to build out the fantasy world.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think that's also kind of going to make a difference. Like I kind of like pinned the period at like 1738 or something like that. I don't know.
oh
There's
cool.
there's a little bit arbitrary, but I wanted to put a pin in.
Yeah,
And then I built out. So it has a bit of a more real world feel, but at the same time not. I don't know. But yeah, I do think readers they'll definitely see similarities with the Hall of Smoke world, enough for it to be familiar and still my voice and everything. But yeah, it's different. It's refreshing. I'm very like I sometimes sit and just read this now.
mm.
Like I usually when I get to the point where one of my books is published, I'm so sick of it. I never want to look at it again. This one, I can still sit down and read it happily for an hour.
Oh, that's awesome.
Like, and I'm able to turn off that analytical editing brain and just enjoy it. And yeah, so for me, that's different. I find it a little bit hard to put into words, but for me, this project is different. This world is different. The characters are different. Writing this book was a completely different experience for many reasons. But yeah, yeah.
That actually leads us right in perfect segue to question three. So number three, are these books set in a different world? So you said that, right? But did you find this one easier or harder to world build than your Hall of Smoke series?
This book just wrote itself.
Awesome.
Like I did not write this book. It wrote itself. I sat down at a computer and it appeared. But it was able to do that because I have such a long history with the kernel of this book. So one of the first books I ever wrote when I was like 12, 13 years old was a version of this book. And it was completely different. Like if I think if I sat a reader down with this and that, they would see very, very few similarities, except the fact that there's like pirates and a female main character. But for me, this is like the fifth iteration of that kernel of an idea that I had when I was a child. So I have a lot of familiarity with this. This is the final, when I sat down to write this final version, I had decided it's no longer going to be historical fiction, it's going to be fantasy. I'm going to completely unhinge. I did not work off that older material. I think might have some problem with my camera here. I did not work off my older material. I just completely rewrote it from the beginning. Blank page, blank slate. And I really just gave myself permission to only write what I wanted to. So I didn't write any of those connection scenes, any scene where I was bored. I'm like, I don't want to do this. I don't connect with it. I would simply skip it. And that did lead to a couple sections of the book where there just wasn't anything there that I had to go back and add to make things make sense. But for the most part, I only wrote what I wanted to when I wanted to. And I think it took about maybe 8 to 10 weeks to draft. And it was just a pleasure to do it. Like it was just fun. I enjoyed it. And I've lost track of the original question.
It's so funny because now you kind of like went into this thing that I've been talking about for so long though. It's like, and I call it the sweet spot. Maybe we should start calling it the kernel book. I don't know. But there have been so many authors I've interviewed within the last couple of years and have talked to where they're like, or listen to a podcast for someone else, and they're like, but they talk about this idea, and right around anywhere from 3, like book 4 or book 5, some people are able to do it in their third book in a different series, but it's just weird when you get that one idea that you're like, I had this for a long time and now I have the experience and the know-how to, I don't know if I say fix it, but to make it grow. So I feel like you have that good seed and now it's like, now you have the fertilizer, and the know-how and that thumb to really make it grow. And it's just funny to me because that's always the book. And that excites me more knowing that about this book though, because that's always the book for me where I'm like, wow, like this author has gone, really to a different level. And I've just noticed this over and over again. So knowing that now, I'm even more excited. But yeah, that's super cool. That's really neat. It's a cool process.
Yeah, I hope everyone loves it as much as I do. Like I know it's not going to be for everybody because no book is for every person. But I do hope that my enjoyment of writing the book and my passion for it does come through. And I think it does. So
yeah. I don't know what more you need with like pirates and weather witches and the high northern seas. I mean, if you need more than that, this is probably the wrong podcast for you. That's all.
Yeah.
Well, I forgot to ask you this question. I want to ask you this question because this I love nautical themes. I'm a huge I got my little sailboat model over here. I'm not a big like I don't know, I don't do a lot of historical fiction on the high seas, but fantasy on the high seas to me is really interesting. So I've always wanted to write, something like you did on the high seas. Maybe I'll put my own spin on it like you did. But I want to know, did you find it difficult to write a book with nautical terminology? Did you have to do any extra research when it came to, the pirates or the high seas to get the feel right? I was just curious at, kind of, did you struggle with those things? Did it take more research or did you already have that previous knowledge? I was just curious how that process went for you.
So I was kind of a really, really nerdy teenager. So around between the ages of 13 and 16, I was obsessed with like the English Royal Navy and tall ships and things like that, as 16-year-old girls are. And so I had this.
Was I did a 16-year-old girl?
Right? So I kind of had this background of just like loving these things. And I had, and I had written these previous versions of this book where, I had done research for that. So I had kind of a base knowledge when it came into flipping into a fantasy world. So I used that base knowledge that I had. And then I also, there's two POVs in the book. One is Mary, she's the weather witch, and she's from a village in a forest. So that I didn't have to worry about her knowing too much about ships and nautical terminology because she's not from that world. So that was very easy to do because her perspective was basically the same as mine. And then the second POV is this naval officer. So of course he needs to know what's going on. So there were times where like when Mary sees a ship, she gives very, very brief overview of what the ship looks like. She's not technical at all. But when Samuel sees a ship, he gives a very technical breakdown. And writing those breakdowns tended to take a little bit of time. I'd pull, out some graphs and stuff again and like decide, okay, this ship has this purpose, so it's going to look like this many crew, this many guns, and all this, and break that all down. So that it was a little bit challenging, but honestly, and I hate to play the fantasy card, but it is a fantasy world. So in the end, I didn't worry too much about becoming too technical.
Yeah.
Because the average reader they're not there to learn nautical terminology. They're there for a story. So I gave enough to show like that this character has this knowledge base. And after that, I just kind of let it go a little bit. And the fantasy world just gives you a lot of room to breathe. And of course, the world building and stuff give you constrictions that you have to work around that aren't part of our world necessarily. So there's creatures called gistings. They're kind of like tree spirits. They grow up from another plane of existence. The only thing they can interact with in the human world is wood, and they live in these trees in these forests. And then the trees are harvested and carved into figureheads. And then the spirit from that tree becomes the spirit of the ship. And they live in the figurehead of the ship, and they help protect the ship. They guide the ship. They have, control over the ship to a certain extent. And then of course you have the weather witches. So between those two, it really kind of changes how things are done. And it has a pretty big effect on, this nautical world and making it different from ours. So
I was thinking in my head, like, as you're explaining this extremely cool world building feature, I wish like if this were like a TV show, I would have just stared into the audience camera and been like, do you see what I mean about her world building? Like that would have been like the perfect, like, breaking the fifth wall or whatever it is right there. But that sounds awesome. That's like a really
Thank you. I love it. Like I'm a forest person. Like, so I really wanted and that image of, well, I got the gisting trees. I'll get a little bit of an insight. I was inspired to write the gisting trees. I was in Wales, in a small town, and they had outside the town, they had this church and this churchyard. And in the churchyard were these huge old yew trees. And this was something was happening over on the mainland. There was some sort of phenomenon with the sun that day, and everything was orange. So I'm in this like medieval churchyard with this giant ancient yew trees, and the sky is orange. And I was like, I have to put this in something. This is amazing. So that evolved and became the gisting trees, these like giant mysterious trees. And then what would people use them for? Like people are going to do something with that, right? So they become the figureheads of ships.
That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Super cool.
Yeah.
I do these interviews because now you got my brain a churning.
Well, the yew tree is on like page 1, so
yeah, that's really cool. Well, that's awesome. So it's funny because we keep going right into the next question, which is like perfect flow. Did you change your writing style or your process at all for this new series? I know you said it was easier. Was there anything, in particular, versus the other books that maybe you did differently that maybe made it a little bit easier?
I think so. I actually very drastically changed the way that I wrote for Darkwater Daughter. I wrote it nonlinear. So that goes hand in hand with only writing what I wanted to each day. I literally only wrote what I wanted to. It's like, this thing in around chapter 40 is what I want to write today. I'm going to write that, even though I wrote chapter 12 yesterday. So I really hopped around. I did have a loose outline. So I had a general sense of where I was going. Plus, like I said, it's kind of an iteration, another iteration of previous books. So I had a
Yeah.
lot of, it was pretty solid in my head. So I wrote it non-linear. I only wrote what I wanted to. And then what was the first part of the question?
Oh, sorry. I was thinking how interesting that is. So did you change your writing style or your
Oh,
process?
this, yeah. And the style itself. So like the process, like, yeah, I wrote it non-linear. The style itself, I did kind of adjust my voice
Oh,
slightly, because like Mary is from, she's basically like a bit of a hick. And she's from this forest, and so the way she sees things, the way she interprets things is going to be through that lens. She has almost no experience of an outside world. She's
mm,
been there her whole life until she leaves. And then you have Samuel, who's basically more like a man of the world. He's more upper class. He has, this extensive education. So his voice is different, like down to like using contractions and things like that. Like, but more in a deeper sense, like his vocabulary is larger. He observes things differently than Mary does. I really tried hard with that. It was the first time I'd really worked with 2 points of view, and they're both first person. So I really wanted to make them as distinct as I could. But this was the learning process for me. So it was the first one I'd done in that way. And I think it succeeded. I think they're different. And yeah, like Hessa, when you read Hall of Smoke, Hessa's voice is very like, she is extremely devout, sacrificial. She's a little bit grim. She's not terribly humorous. Mary's voice is quite humorous. She's, got this slightly like, snarky sort of hick view of the world. I say hick, but it's really not hick. She's just, from a small town, and, you know, grew up with an interesting company. So yeah,
no, that's
there,
cool.
there's definitely differences.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
one is different. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you think have you maybe I know it's like, you're just writing book two in this new series, but do you have a preference now? Like one versus the other? Like, or is it just
No.
nice to switch back and forth?
Yeah, I think it's all like, yeah, I don't know. I find they all come pretty naturally. I think Hess's voice is probably the most natural for me. If
Mm.
I'm going to default and stop thinking about it, I'll probably edge into Hess's voice.
Oh,
I tend to be a little bit of a pessimist. I tend to have very hard lines and things like that, at least in my initial instinct. And I tend to be a little bit jaded and grumpy. So that's Hessa. But then, like I think as authors, every point of view that we're going to write from is going to come from us somewhere inside. There's some aspect of our personality that we can lean into, even if it's the villain, even if it's the worst person possible. There's some part of us that can relate to that person and find their voice. So it's just a matter of like just clicking my brain one way or the other. And um, I also lean into voice heavier in later drafts. Like, closer into line edits is where I'm really going to focus in on that character's individual voice. The first draft, there might, like, between points of view, there might be almost no difference at all. But then I'm leaning into that later because it's too overwhelming to try to work on that initially. I'm very much a like a write in layers type person,
mm.
like building it out and make,
Yeah.
the initial draft really is nothing. Like I would say almost now that I zero draft. Like I don't even consider it a first draft. It's just like putting the sand in the sand pit,
Yeah, yeah.
sort of analogy.
That's a really good way to put it.
And not worrying about it. It's just like, no, I'm just going to barf this onto the page. And then, the real writing is going to come when I'm doing rewrites. So,
That's a good way to put it. You did mention something though that I just want to mention to the audience because I've noticed this. I've taken what my fantasy book and I pretty much did the zero draft like you were talking about, and I was like, I'm just gonna get it on paper, just gonna barf it out and clean up the mess later.
mm,
But like I've noticed that draft two has been harder for me because I just want to mention this because I think a lot of people haven't. I've never heard this discussed really. I've heard like, yeah, like the sandbox and different things. But like, I just want to point out, like, I think the hardest thing for newer authors, or for authors who have, written, like you've written Hessa, or this type of style. I think the hardest thing to do now is, after that zero draft, is to learn in the different drafts going up, what are you going to focus on? Michael
Mm,
Fletcher talks about this a bit, when him and I discussed this, and he has an entire process. Like, zero draft, he just does this. First draft, he does only is worried about this, and I'm like, I think that's the hardest thing for me personally, is like figuring out what I'm going to focus on the new draft or at different times, because I think you're trying to zoom out too much, at different times. So I just think that a lot of people, I think that's probably what they're stuck with. So if
mm,
you're writing in the audience, I just want to point that out. That's what I've noticed that I've been getting stuck with recently, with this particular book, is because I'm not sure, on draft two. So now I've done a lot better figuring out, like, okay, I just want to figure this out, and make this a little bit better, and then worry about the next thing in draft three, or add three, or edit three, or whatever. But I think that you said it really well there. So that's awesome. I'm going to make you choose now.
okay.
So if you could go on one adventure with one of your characters, who would it be and why?
Oh, it would definitely be Mary. No, wait, no, it's Charles Grant.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I didn't think you were going to say that. Okay. Why is that?
So Charles Grant, you meet him also in, I think is it chapter 1 or chapter 2? I think it's chapter 1 of Darkwater Daughter, and he is a former highwayman
Mm,
who gambles too much and drinks too much.
awesome.
And he's a charmer, but he's prone to like existential crises, and he has too broad of an education for his own good.
That's awesome. Okay, sold. I understand.
Yeah, in his own what he has a sentence where he describes himself at some point, and it's like, I'm charming, well educated, and willing to do bad things. So
Awesome.
he's
That's
fun. I would want to hang out with him. We could go on an adventure. And he's also, relatively capable.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Oh, that's really cool.
yeah, he's a fun character. I like him a lot.
That's really cool. If Robert Downey Jr. does not play him in the movie, then I don't know what the director is doing. That's all I have
Oh
to say.
no. Oh, you're right. Oh no.
That is amazing. 'Cause I can see him saying that line so well and selling, like, just selling
Yeah.
the movie.
Just but younger, just a bit of a younger Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh my God,
Like
I'm gonna have to
maybe
send it to you now.
like 24, 25.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, my buddy just sent me. It's so funny you said that. My buddy just sent me this kid who's around that age, and he goes, "This guy is the next Robert Downey Jr."
Oh
And I
yeah.
small clip of what he was in. So I'll see him at the book sale later. I'm gonna have to ask him what because he's really great with actors and actresses' names. So I'll have to ask him, and I'll send that kid to you. We'll
That
send
would
the
be great. That would be great.
and then you'll have somebody in mind the next couple of years. So yeah, that's really
Mhm.
cool. So for seven here, when it comes to your books, what is one place you wish you could visit, and why?
Um, hmm, the
Guess pretty cool
Gistwold.
places. Okay.
Yeah, the Gistwold in Darkwater Daughter is just like this forest of ancient trees with tree spirits. It's very gloomy, and it doesn't quite obey the seasons. So it'll be midwinter, and there'll still be, this birch will be in leaf. And, there's the gisting spirits can appear, and they kind of manifest as different things from their surroundings, kind of a bit of a personality thing. Um, and it's just very mysterious, but also very warm. And yeah, I think
Awesome.
it would be told. It's also a place where I would be less likely to die, because most places in my books are very deadly.
I
So
was gonna say you got some.
let's just
Yeah,
stick with that.
that's awesome. Well, I'm gonna do a little segue, because I've been, as you've been talking about this, and I'm thinking of Hall of Smoke, and then I'm thinking of your blurbs for the other two books, and I'm just curious. Have you thought of writing like a Druid series at some point? Because I gotta say, as one of your readers, I think you would do so well with it, and I think you would come up with like the coolest like form of Druidry that I've seen in a long time. So I just want to ask that question. Have you ever thought of that?
I can't say I've thought of it very directly. Um, I have sort of lately been leaning towards, more classic fantasy classifications in terms of
Oh,
my characters, because it's easier to market,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
because readers immediately understand, oh, this is a cleric character, oh, this is a paladin character, and they can, connect. And so I would totally do something like druid characters. It's actually got my brain going now.
I was just curious because, my friend was talking, we were talking about this, because we were talking about Hall of Smoke, and he was asking me some questions. I was trying not to get things away. And he's like, oh, okay. He goes, and he's like, well, what did you like most about it? I said, I think the connection with the world building with like nature and
Mm,
the earth, and I'm trying to think of ways to say it to not spoil for people. But yeah, I just thought like, your characters to me always seem to have a really good connection with the natural world. And I
mhm.
was just like, it came to me a couple of days ago when I was thinking about something, and I was like, yeah, I think you'd do a really good job writing like something like that, like a nature-esque, like, yeah. So
Well,
I was just curious.
yeah, I maybe already did slightly,
I feel like you slightly did, yeah.
like the main character in Pillar of Ash, the fourth Hall of Smoke
Hmm.
book. No spoilers, but they're descendants of Hessa. So
Just
Hessa
made
had
my day.
babies.
It's
Um,
only like 9 a.m. That's awesome.
so the main character is Iska, Hessa's daughter, and she is very much a pacifist. She lives in the forest. She's a healer. She's working with, herbs and stuff like that. And I think I kind of already did that.
That's awesome. I didn't know that. That's
As
awesome.
I'm thinking like,
That's
because
super
I work on a lot of books at once. I'm writing a lot of books at once. I tend to actually lose track of my characters sometimes. So it takes me a minute to like think through. But yeah, yeah, and I would happily do a book where I leaned more into that kind of world. It's like I live in a cabin in the bush. This is where I am the most at home. I'm in the forest all day, every day. This is very much a natural kind of outpouring for me. It's yeah, it's an environment I'm very comfortable in. So yeah, woodsy druidic stuff sounds great to me.
I don't know, like, because we were talking about authors and fantasy drafts, and like who, because my brother, I was teasing him because he's really into NFL, and like I love football, don't get me wrong, but like I'm more into books. And but my buddy and I, we were discussing that. We're like, who, my friend's just so funny. I'm gonna hire him one of these days, because literally he gives me so many crazy ideas, and he's like, who would you pick to write, this character or this whatever or this genre when they don't. So we were discussing that, and I was like, oh, this would be really, because we just watched the D&D movie, and I
Oh,
love
it was so good, eh?
so good, yeah. And I love how they did the druid in there, and I was like, God,
Mhm.
I would do such a good job with this with this character. I was like, that's like I said, I was like, this is like, I was you and then my other friend, where I was like, yeah, I was like, I could see him doing like a sci-fi, doing like like a death knight kind of thing,
Mm,
because he kind of does something similar to that. And I was like, but not really, it's more like a sci-fi setting, like a Star Wars fantasy, whatever. But I was like, just a straight fantasy. I was like, I'd love to see him, do that. So yeah, you were
yeah.
my two fantasy drafts for
All
authors.
right, I'm in.
That's really cool. So yeah, so I was just curious because it was been in the back of my mind. But yeah, that's awesome. I loved Hessa. I loved how you did the natural world. Um, Now you just told me that about book four, so you just blew up my TBR pile for the summer, but that's okay because now I gotta.
Well, it doesn't come out till January, so you're
That's
safe for a
fair.
little bit.
Well,
Although I can get you an arc if you want. Like,
that's fair too. So I'll have to definitely get book two and three up there a little bit quicker than I was thinking now. So that's fine. That's okay. Um, yeah, my wife, she said, she goes, well, do you want to save her book two for when we go back to the lake? And I was like, because it was, again, it was it's called Lake George. It's such a natural setting. I felt like
mm,
it was very similar. Not as, because it's summer, but it was funny because we were doing some hikes and stuff and going around the lake, and it was just so cool to be in that type of atmosphere. I felt like I was kind
mhm.
of Hess's atmosphere, and reading about it at the same time. So I was like, I don't know, next month I was like maybe I'll,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was
Well,
really cool. But,
actually, Temple of No God takes place in summer, so it
oh,
kind of
that's right.
fits.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
yeah.
The opening is winter though, so
Oh,
I think a lot of readers walk away from my books with the impression that they're all wintry.
mm.
Because I often open and end with wintry scenes, but the core of this book is actually summer,
Oh,
which I have to remind my own self because my favorite scenes are the winter ones.
yeah. Oh,
So
that's funny.
yeah,
Oh, that's awesome.
no.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, and then that last one. So, of course, do you have any news, updates, promos, or current projects that you can share with us?
Yeah. So, well, Darkwater Daughter is coming out July 11th. It's open for pre-order everywhere, in print, ebook, and audiobook. The audiobook is going to be phenomenal. We've
Oh, that's
got two
exciting.
narrators. We've got Moira Quirk and Samara Rukin.
Oh, wow.
Samuel Rukin. Sorry, I don't know if I can say that last name right. Anyway, it's going to be amazing. Moira Quirk narrates like Gideon the Ninth and
Yeah,
stuff
yeah,
like
yeah.
that. Like, yeah. So I am
Wow.
so excited to hear this production. Like, I'm over the moon. So that's coming. And then Pillar of Ash, the fourth book in the Hall of Smoke series, is coming out January 16th. It's already up for pre-order everywhere. Audiobook is coming a little bit later. And then, yeah, Darkwater Daughter 2 is coming out next July. It's not open for pre-order or anything yet, but you can add it on Goodreads.
So you're telling me that I could listen to Hall of Smoke on Audible today?
Yes, and Hall of Smoke is
And
now
then, oh,
included in Audible's Plus catalog.
I did
So if
not.
you have an Audible subscription, you can listen to Hall of Smoke for free and check it out. So you get a sense for the series and the narrator, and then all of the other books are also going, like Temple of No God and Bear of Winter are already there on Audible, and then Pillar of Ash will be coming in January.
Oh, I did not know that. I'm having a
Ah.
pretty good day. It's only 9:05. It's a long week. I kind of earned this, but
Yeah.
that's exciting. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
I am a passionate audiobook listener. 90% of my reading is audiobooks because just sitting down and reading is not something I normally have time to do in my day. So I absolutely love audiobooks. I highly encourage anyone listening to check out the audiobooks. The narrator for the Hollow of Smoke books, she was so she worked with me so closely on everything. Like, she would email like, hey, what do you think about the sound of this voice? And like, do you have actors that you'd like me to base this character's like, voice off of? And what accents do you want? We sat and worked through all the fantasy accents for this world, and she pulled them off. And it like blew my mind. I'm like, can we have like a Scottish Welsh, POV character voice? And she's like, yeah, I could do that.
Oh, wow.
So, and then like, I think Barrow of Winter, the people group, they had like a slight like Romanian accent. I'm like, this is what's in my head. This, like, can we go slightly Romanian here? And that's what it ended up
Oh,
with.
that's
And
awesome.
she just put so much care and concern into these books, and I'm very, very happy with her
That's super
work.
cool. I was gonna say I had one credit sitting in my back pocket, so I'll have to do that. And I also love, I'm like such a geek about this now. Like, I also love to do the Audible on books I've already read.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if I haven't read like book 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever yet, because I feel like it's like another layer of the onion. I feel like there's always something that I missed the first time, or I don't know. I feel like it adds depth for me
Mm-hmm.
personally as like a reader and a writer. I always learn something more. So that's really cool.
I feel
Definitely.
like it makes sense. Like it's getting into your brain in a different way.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. There's
like,
all.
and from, I know some people, they can't do that. Like, audio just does not work for them.
Yeah, yeah.
For me, that's how the story gets in my brain in the most visceral way. Like, yeah, really,
See, for me, it's weird.
brings
Like
it to life.
there was somebody, I don't want to mention names, but there was somebody whose narrator ruined a book for me.
Mm,
Because I was like, I was gonna do that, and I tried, and for me, and my friends like, you're so weird. I'm like, I know, but like, I have to read the book before listening to it because this happened to me, and I thought
mm,
the person had the wrong narrator, and then when they
mm-hmm.
went back to redo them, by the time they went back to redo them, which is we're talking like 10 years later, this author's been out for a while. I went back and read. I was like, I'm gonna read the book instead, so I
Mm-hmm.
did that, and I really enjoyed it. Got up, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna like try this again, and then when they switched to Audible, that person got a new narrator, and it like totally enhanced
Ah,
enhanced it for me.
good.
But ever since I had that one bad experience, I'm like, it was really bad. Like, I'm
It,
so glad that this author got a better narrator, because I've heard a lot of people say this about the older copies. It was really like, the library copies, as they used to call them on CD and stuff. It was
yeah.
really bad. So
Some of them are pretty rough. Like, I've
yeah,
tried to listen to like, obviously writing a nautical fantasy with ships that have spirits. Everyone's like, oh, you have to read Robin Hobb, like
oh, yep.
Magic Ship series. And I was like, I've tried to like 4 times, but the audio narrator is
Yeah,
not great. And
yeah,
every time it's shut me down. And then I don't have time to sit and read physical books, especially
yeah,
when
yeah, yeah.
thick.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
it's like one of those like dream things for me. Like someday I'm gonna take a sabbatical, 3 months off, and I'm gonna like read, the live trade. Is it live trade ships? Live ships, something like that. Anyway, they're on my shelf. Someday I'm gonna just sit and read through them all. Or I mean, I hope they redo the audiobooks. But
Yeah. Well, I was so lucky this person did, because I was like, I said to my buddy, I was like, I'm just gonna, because I didn't know that. I was like, I'm just gonna bite the bullet. And he goes, I think the
yeah.
narrator's fine. And I didn't realize that they had switched narrators because it'd been 10 years. I think it was longer than that. I think it was like 15 years since the book came out, 17 or whatever. So yeah, I was like, it was definitely made me as an author be like, okay, if I'm gonna be doing, like you, I'm like, if I'm gonna be doing audio, I'm like, definitely need to find the right person, because like I
Yeah.
want to have people experience it like yourself, who don't have time, or like myself, where it's like it adds to the experience and doesn't like take them out. So yeah, it
Mhm.
was definitely a very hard lesson to learn as an author.
It can really make or break an
Yeah,
audiobook.
yeah, totally. And you're talking about a whole new market you can get into,
Oh yeah.
and it's like I have to do half the book I read for book club. I read half, and then the other half I listen to in the car. Otherwise I would
Mhm.
never, get a book done.
Yeah.
I've been very fortunate with the ones I listened to recently, but definitely
Mhm.
doing Hall of Smoke today. So like, I just got done with another
Nice.
one for book club. So
Yeah.
that's exciting. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming out again. I look
Thank you for
forward
having
to,
me.
yeah, of course, of course. I look forward to our next conversation, and seeing, how book two's doing, for your new series. And I definitely want to figure out what, Hessa's daughter's doing. So I can't wait for that. So we'll definitely have to, leave an open date for us, for the
Mhm.
winter. That next season will be season 4 by then, will be a little bit
Okay.
more congruous, because my son will hopefully be sleeping better by then.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, knock on wood. My books will be, hopefully, like, I'll be on the back burner and just hanging out, watching them release and stuff. So yeah, I'll be really excited to do that. So I'm gonna actually put you down, for save a winter date for you for that already.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to read, Temple of No God, here the next couple of weeks. Like I said, I got some reviews coming out. So Hall of Smoke will be one of them. I'm gonna do the book, print, and then the Audible too. I'll just do those right, in the same one. So I'll
Awesome. Thank you.
yeah, if there's anything else we can do for you, just let me know. But I'll be, if you want to send me a reminder, I'll be posting your July 11th release date. That's
Okay.
put it everywhere. But if there's anything else I can do for you in the meantime, just let me know. Like I said, I'll send you an email out for this, and we'll help you out as best as we can.
Thank you so much. It was
Not a
great to
problem.
talk to you.
You too. Hopefully, I'll talk to you soon on social media.
Yeah. See you around.
Yep. Have a good
Have a
rest
good
of your day.
day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.